wonderful.
We were there.
Yeah.
We went to the.
You comfortable?
Is it the city hall? I suppose.
Whoa,
Yeah.
City hall that has
It went
that
quiet.
lecture somewhere.
Yes, very
Just
like that.
incredibly
Yes,
old.
yes. It's like
Provost.
the city hall is
There she
most
is.
beautiful
Yeah.
building in
Yeah,
Paris.
it is.
And
Good
the
morning,
office is
everybody.
bigger.
I'm Kimberly Goff-Cruz. I'm Secretary and Vice President for Student Life here at Yale. And it is my pleasure, my true pleasure, to welcome all of you in the audience and those of you live streaming on behalf of the university to this session of the Kerry Initiative's Yale Climate Conference. Yale has had a long-term commitment to a sustainable, environmentally responsive campus. And so it is fitting that Secretary Kerry's first major event at Yale focuses on environmental responsibility and action. Yale's commitment was strengthened recently as President Peter Salovey, together with 11 other university presidents, founded a coalition to address the rise in global temperatures and to help create a clean energy economy. In July, the university also implemented a carbon charge. This groundbreaking initiative, the first for any U.S. university, will tax university buildings for the cost of their carbon emissions. We will research and develop learning that we hope will influence national carbon pricing policy. We're very excited. Our goal is to reduce campus greenhouse emissions 43% below our 2005 levels by 2020. This morning, Secretary Kerry, a member of the Yale College class of 1966, we're proud to say, will moderate a discussion on state, city, and international efforts toward responsible action regarding climate change. We are fortunate that he is joined by 4 panelists who have set an example of environmental leadership and courage. Governor Jerry Brown of the state of California, also Yale Law School class of 1964, and Governor Jay Inslee of the state of Washington have pledged to continue to work on climate change following the United States withdrawal from the Paris Climate Change Agreement. Both have spent much of their public life advocating for the environment and for citizen engagement and legislative action that leads to greenhouse gas reduction and energy innovation. We are also joined by Anne Hidalgo, mayor of the city of Paris, who co-hosted the Climate Summit for Local Leaders in 2015 and was recently elected as the chair of C40 Cities, a network of 90 cities committed to climate change that together constitute over 650 million people, and 1/4 of the world economy. And finally, we are joined by Jim Young Kim, president of the World Bank, who is also the former president of our sister institution, Dartmouth College. He has called the Paris Agreement a defining moment in human history and has identified climate change as a key issue that must be addressed in the fight to reduce global poverty. Secretary Kerry, as I turn the program over to you, I'd like to say on behalf of the institution how happy we are that the initiative is here at the Jackson Institute and to welcome you back home to Yale. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Kim, thank you very, very much. Thank you to all of you for getting up. And it's not that early. We are really pleased to be able to welcome you here this morning, and I hope the sound works out and you can hear us. I know there's a little bit of an echo, but this is such a beautiful hall, and we knew we were going to have more people than any of the other facilities would allow. So we took a chance, and thank you all for being here. First of all, Kim, thank you very much. The university is deeply involved in working on climate change, and there's an effort that has been worked on for some period of time here, which is the carbon charge that you may have read about in the Daily today. But the university is now implementing a campus-wide carbon fee system so that each of the buildings, some 250 buildings, will be responsible for their own carbon footprint. This has been worked on for some period of time, being announced today, and I congratulate the university on doing that. It will involve something like 70% of all the carbon emissions of the university, and Yale is the first university in the United States to do this. So congratulations to everybody who's had a part of that. This panel, let me just say with respect to the yesterday and today. Yesterday morning we had a terrific panel involving the former Secretary of Energy, Ernie Moniz, our climate envoy, Jonathan Pershing, and others, who talked about where we are on energy and the importance of energy policy, the transition that can take place and must take place in order to deal with the challenge of climate change. There is a solution to climate change. It's not something we have to wait for in the future. It's here now. It's called energy policy. And if we were to implement the right choices with respect to wind and biomass and solar and so forth, which our panelists will talk about, there's an enormous amount that we can do and move much faster. So we also had Jeff Immelt and former Secretary of Treasury Hank Paulson, who talked about the private sector role in all of this. And you're going to hear about all of this again today, because this panel represents real stuff that is happening, real decision-making by governors, by mayor, by the head of the World Bank, and the World Bank has enormous leverage in its ability to be able to create change on a global basis. Now, this afternoon we will have former Secretary of State Jim Baker. He happens to also be former almost everything else. He's the three-time presidential campaign manager. He was the Secretary of Treasury. He was Chief of Staff in the White House. There's really amazingly knowledgeable person who at age 88 is still active and moving. He's going to be here this afternoon to talk about carbon pricing, and the political playing field on a bipartisan basis. And we will also hear from Senator John McCain, Senator Lindsey Graham by video. They couldn't be here because of the bill on the floor, but they're going to speak, and that's welcoming people back to this fight who need to be part of it. And then finally, Leonardo DiCaprio will be with us this afternoon at 5 o'clock here in this hall to talk about citizen activism, which Jerry knows full well as I do, and I think Jay knows is at the heart of how we're going to save ourselves from ourselves. So that's the lineup. But right now, we have with us four extraordinary leaders on this and public servants who are making key decisions about public policy regarding this. And I think we're going to have a fun, I hope, engaging, back and forth conversation more than any speeches at you. And I'll have a chance to sort of ask a few questions to try to elicit some of what we want to try to get at. So let's just sort of dig in if we can. I'm going to begin with Governor Inslee, who has a cap-and-trade program in the state of Washington. Jay's been a member of Congress, a leader on this, and a community activist going way, way back. That's how he first got involved, and I'm really delighted to welcome him here to Yale. So Jay, if you'd share a few thoughts just to open up, and then we'll come back and get into the dialogue.
Well, thank you, and thanks, Secretary Kerry, for all your leadership. This initiative is very important. I appreciate the introduction. I appreciate everybody being here. I was thinking about a comment. I wanted to honor former Senator Kerry with one of his predecessors of a quote of John F. Kennedy's his inaugural address. I was thinking what fit this context. And of course, we recall when he said the torch has been passed to a new generation, tempered in a harsh and bitter peace, unwilling to accept, permit, or witness the slow erosion of the civil rights and human dignity that America had stood for. And I think the same could be said for this moment, that the torch is being passed to a new generation that has been tempered by the harsh and bitter science that demands we all act, and unwilling to witness or permit the slow erosion of the atmosphere that sustains human civilization and all we hold dear. And I think there's no more perfect place to talk about passing that torch than here at Yale to a generation that truly does understand this science and truly does demand its leaders act. But that torch has also been passed from the White House, where we would like to have the torch of leadership on this measure, to other leaders, to governors, to mayors, to individuals, to college students. And I think the fundamental message I would have is that we all need to pick up that torch that has been dropped from the current occupant of the White House and hold it high and bright as high as we can, and that's what is necessary at the moment. The good news is we're picking up that torch, the governors. Governor Brown, Governor Coleman, and ourselves, within 36 hours of the president running up the white flag of surrender to the forces of climate change when he bailed on the Paris Agreement, within 36 hours we had stood up a new organization called the United States Climate Alliance. And it's appropriately called the United States Climate Alliance because states are powerful in this regard. And we now have 14 states in this alliance who have both pledged and shown teeth and meat on the bone of policies to decarbonize our economy. And that's succeeding. And that's the good news. Our alliance represents 40% of the United States economy. And we can legitimately tell presidents, prime ministers, mayors around the world, the United States is not bailing on this effort. The United States is acting with the United States Climate Alliance. And that's alive and well, and that's what Governor Browner and I are here to talk about. Just briefly, I'll tell you the things that we're doing in my state. I have imposed a cap. Washingtonians deserve a cap limiting the amount of carbon pollution that is damaging my state. This morning, there's 1,000 firefighters trying to prevent a fire from burning down the city of Roslyn, Washington. It is a beautiful place. I'm here to say I'm not going to allow that without a fight. And our fight starts with a cap on carbon pollution, and I have placed that. It's the first executive order in the United States that caps the amount through a regulatory, concrete, enforceable, lawful means to guarantee Washingtonians they won't be strangled by carbon dioxide. We have a clean energy fund, which has developed a company that has the largest vanadium flow grid-scale battery in the world today. We're moving. Help is on the way. Thanks for holding up that torch. Thank you, Secretary.
Jay, thank you very, very much, and thank you for the outstanding job that you are doing. I just comment to everybody here that this alliance and the efforts that exist out there, there's a Live by Paris effort, there's a We're Still In effort, and the alliance is bringing everybody together in order to send the message as strongly as possible. The message is this: the President of the United States may have decided to pull out of Paris, but the people of the United States remain committed to Paris. And we are not only going to meet the Paris Agreement, in my judgment, we are going to exceed it. And the reason we're going to do it is because of what Governor Inslee and Governor Brown and other governors around the country are doing. 29 states in the United States have passed a renewable portfolio standard. That represents 70% of the population of the nation. Another 8 states are pursuing a voluntary renewable portfolio standard. So together, those 38 states represent 80% of the population of the United States. And we are already more than 50% of the way to meeting our Paris Accord. The problem is, and Jerry knows this better than anybody, in Paris, we couldn't, because we couldn't create a mandatory mechanism for a lot of reasons. So what Paris did was send a message to the marketplace. You've got to start investing and changing. And what's happened since Paris is we have doubled the amount of money that is now being invested in alternative renewable energy over the amount that's going into fossil fuel. And for the first time in American history, more money is going into alternative renewable energy than fossil. So that's the product of the work of these governors. And the mayors on the grassroots level, there is an organization called C40, which is an organization of the cities around the world. And Hidalgo, the mayor of Paris, is chairing that now. And she's going to chat with us a little bit about what cities can do and how important it is for cities to be able to take the lead here. Annie, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you, John, for this invitation. I'm very happy, very proud a little afraid because you have to support my very, very French accent. And I'm sorry, but I'm happy to be here with all these big leaders, and thank you for your leadership, John. Of course, today cities are the right level with states to act and to fight against climate change. We are the right level because we are a democratic level at a human level. Mm-hmm. And in the cities, we can have and build strategies, we can build alliances with private sector, with citizens, with NGOs, and also with all the people who know that we have to do now, not tomorrow, now. It is an urgency to act today. And today, when you see all the cities, the global cities in the world, the mayor, the community of the mayor of global cities, we share the same visions. We are very committed together in this fight because we see we are on the forefront of all the global issues. In our cities, we are the cities who produce the gas emissions, and we are also the cities who the problem came, and we have to act very, very quickly. Today, all the cities are very close in this vision, and we organize a network, the C40. The C40 is a network with 40 cities, but 91 cities. We will change the name because 40 was in the past. We are 91 cities, bigger cities on the world, and we are committed, engaged to fight climate change. And we represent 650 million people on the world. We represent 25% of the GDP of the world, and we are powerful. I think together in this right level to fight against climate change, we can organize this alliance and be efficient today, not tomorrow, about climate change. Because climate change is terrific for the humankind, but with the climate change, we can have new opportunities in business market, in employment, and also in democratic managing of our communities. And together with the C40, we are very committed. We work with UN, with international organizations, because today, maybe cities, we are more agile. We have more agility than states, national states. And this is why I think the right level is here. In a city like Paris, we share experience, and I can put in my policies in Paris all the very great experience that you in your state, in California, in another city you have. And it's very interesting for us because we don't have time to wait. And when we share the experience, we can go faster and quickly. Well, today I think in the world, our network with NGOs and international institutions, we can have this powerful alliance. And when we heard the President of the United States, when he talked about Paris Agreement, and we don't understand what he said. and we don't know what happened today because he's speaking UN. But we are a majority in the planet who we think that we need to act today and together. And we are very powerful. We are very powerful, more than the President of the United States. I'm sorry. I prefer to say to you, and in our network, we have a lot of cities of America. Cities of America are with us in California, but also New Orleans, Chicago, New York, San Francisco. The cities are together in this fight, and we act. And I think our powerful is to be visionary and to be very concretely. And we are together in this fight. We need your help also because, yes, we have this problem now with the President of the United States, but we have also problem many times with the fake news. The fake news need to be fight. And we need also journalists, we need also medias, because it's not possible to fight and to hurt that no, climate change, it's just an ideology. No, it's not an ideology, it's a reality. And we need also with private sector, with citizens, with NGOs, with international level, with cities, states, have with us journalists, because the fake news is for us today very dangerous, and we have to be stronger together, and thanks if the journalists come with us in this fight.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you
sorry.
very, very much. I know that Anne was concerned about delivering all those comments in English, but I think you will agree with me. She didn't miss a word, and she did it with a beautiful accent.
No, thank you.
Jim Kim, one of my delights serving as Secretary of State and before that in the Senate was working with Jim. And I have to tell you, he has taken the World Bank into modernity, and particularly refocused it in its financing approach and its thinking about how to stimulate investment in the right areas, and has been central to our ability to get a Paris Agreement done and a lot of other things. So Jim, thank you for your tremendous work, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you. Secretary Kerry, John, you were my senator, and so as always, I go wherever you ask me to. I have to say, you know, they told me that this place seats 2,500 people, and they told me it would be full. And I said, are you kidding me? College students, 10 o'clock in the morning? But you guys have done great, but we didn't get quite 2,500. But
this is the former president of Dartmouth speaking.
Dartmouth, we would never get this number of people. You know, let me talk a little bit about what's happening in the world, right? And so it's kind of crazy for me to think that in this country, in very close to where I work every day in Washington, D.C., there's a debate about climate change, because there's not a single African head of state who is not convinced that climate change is real. The famine that we're facing now, 20 million people potentially at risk of famine, this is directly related in the minds of the heads of state of Africa to climate change. What they say is that you in the rich world debate climate change. We in Africa have the boot of climate change on our necks. Now, it's not just that there are heavy rains, it's not just that there are droughts, but most of the infrastructure in Africa, for example, is not climate resilient. So roads wash out, bridges wash out. The countries are completely debilitated when these things happen. And you know, I asked the Director of Science in the White House a year and a half ago, well, what is this? And he says, it's actually pretty simple. If the air is warmer and the oceans are warmer, the storms are going to be worse. Now, look, everyone has to be careful about tying any particular event to climate change. But I'm telling you, in most of the developing world, the awareness of this is intense. Now, here's the issue in my mind. Lots of good things are happening. I think the Paris Agreement was great, but I worried because the next step after the Paris Agreement was putting the deals together that would transform our ability to invest in both mitigation and adaptation. Now, I think that we suffered from a sort of collective hangover. We celebrated so much after Paris that the next step, which is to say, so where are the deals? How can we invest more? It took almost a full year to get that conversation started again. Secretary Kerry is right that now it's increasing, but a doubling of investments is nowhere close to what we need. We need many, many trillions of dollars. So just to give you a couple of quick numbers, in cities, over the next 15 years, in the entire world, there will be $90 trillion investment in infrastructure. And that $90 trillion represents more infrastructure investment than in the entire history of the world prior to that, in the next 15 years. And 70% of that will be in cities, and the question is, will there be enough financing to make sure that that infrastructure investment is climate smart? Will we be using bus rapid transit? Will we be using electric cars? Will we increase the density of cities to reduce the carbon footprint? And right now, the answer has to be not yet, because the financing is not available. Over 60% of the world's cities will be at risk for tsunamis and storm surges. Flood losses were about $6 billion in 2005. By 2050, it'll be more than $50 billion a year. So what do you do? And now just give me, if you indulge me for just a second, 20 some years ago, I was part of a movement. And the movement was called 50 Years is Enough. And in that movement, we called for the closing of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund on the occasion of its 50th birthday in 1994. So I was on the streets protesting against the World Bank in 1994, and now I'm president. Go figure. I in fact told President Obama when he interviewed me to nominate me, I told him that. And I have to say, I'm incredibly grateful, and maybe he was one of the few presidents who would have actually nominated me. But now that I have gotten into the World Bank group, there's a very specific message that I want to send to all of you. One of my heroes is a professor right here. I don't know if he's here, Professor Robert Schiller in the economics department. And Professor Schiller wrote this incredible book that he later told me hasn't sold very well, but he wrote this incredible book called Finance and the Good Society. And he wrote the book as almost a love letter to his students who were part of the Occupy movement. And he tried to make the case that many, many good things in the world can happen if you get the financing right. Let me just give you some examples. So in India, Prime Minister Modi has a huge ambition to move away from coal and to solar energy. But the problem right now is the cost of capital. Financing is a major issue, and it's a question of whether we can find the financing that will keep up with Prime Minister Modi's ambitions. In other countries, the major emitters, Indonesia, Vietnam, Pakistan, Philippines, in those countries, we find that the leaders want to move toward cleaner solutions, but the financing's not available. So there is a fantastic opportunity right now. Over $10 trillion is sitting in negative interest rate bonds. That means that if you go to the Japanese central bank or the European central bank or the German central bank, you give them your money, and instead of what normal banks do, pay you interest, you actually pay them to hold your money. So over $10 trillion negative interest rate bonds. Another 20 trillion or so sitting in government bonds earning very little, usually less than 1% interest, and another $8 trillion or so sitting in people's safes with 1,000-euro bills just sitting in cash because there's so much uncertainty. Now, of that $40 trillion or so, everyone is looking for higher return. The Indians, the Indonesians, the Pakistanis, the great emitters who want to move in a direction of low carbon energy provision don't have access to capital to make those investments. So what we're trying to do is use every single tool we have, and this is debt instruments where we take first loss that reduces the risk for the others who are investing. We have political risk insurance. We have credit enhancement that will be used when countries say, okay, we promise to a private sector provider of solar, for example, that we will make the payments, every month, every year, whatever. But sometimes they get in trouble. So we can step in and provide a kind of insurance, and we'll make those payments. But the point I want to make here is that this is really the problem of climate change. I think we understand the science. I think there's a lot of great motivation, but the nationally determined contributions that came out of Paris will not keep us under 2 degrees Celsius. It will not keep us under 2 degrees Celsius. The key right now is to move on finance. And so we at the World Bank Group went from, in 2009 at the Copenhagen meetings, we were not allowed into the room because we were the bad guys on the climate change issue. This year, not only were we in the room, but we pledged to get to $30 billion a year by 2020. And we're on our way. We're going to get there. We're going to be the largest funders of climate change activity in the world. But it's still not enough. I've ended a lot of my talks on climate change with a pretty simple idea. And the simple idea is that I have a 17-year-old son and an 8-year-old son. And based on the way they already talk to me today, they're going to say to me someday, Dad, you were president of the World Bank Group. Why the hell didn't you do more? Why didn't you do more? You knew what the issue was. Why didn't you do more? Now, the downside of that is that my 8-year-old saw that on video. It's like every other day or so he said, Dad, do more on climate change. The issue is this, folks. The issue is this. Go read Professor Schiller's book. Right? Right now, the blockage is access to finance. Right now, the problem is making sure that all of the great motivations and all the great declarations that have been put on the table can be taken forward. This is the hard work of actually making deals happen. Secretary Kerry joined us last April, and we formed something called Invest for Climate. We're bringing together investors, we're bringing together climate change specialists, leaders of countries, we're bringing together all the multilateral development banks, the Asian Development Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, and we're all coming together and saying, okay, so can we offload risk here to the local pension fund, and then bring in funders here, and can we use political risk insurance? This is what we have to do. And it's not as glamorous as talking about what the future will look like, but it's what has to be done. We are committed to it, and we'll continue to push in that direction.
Jim, thank you. Thank you very much, Jim. And just to underscore this investment opportunity, in direct contradiction to what President Trump said when he said he's putting America first by pulling us out of Paris. In effect, he's putting us last because he has lost the momentum, he's lost the credibility, he's taken us out of a process where all this future marketplace is there, and he's actually put a cloud over American business. And you hear this in various parts of the world, and is nodding, where our businesses will suffer as a result of the decision the president made because people don't believe we're serious and are offering leadership on this. This energy marketplace is the largest market the world has ever seen. I mean, you have about 4 to 5 billion users today, and it's going to go up to 9 billion users in the next 20, 30 years. And people buy energy, they buy water, they buy transportation. So it's revenue producing, which means you can have a return on investment. And yet we're not moving aggressively into that marketplace. Governor Brown, I just want to insert personally, is somebody that I have known and worked with and followed for many, many years now. And he has really set an example in the state of California. The state of California, freestanding, is probably the 6th largest economy in the world. And when California decides to do something, it has an impact on the rest of the country and the rest of the world. To wit, when California sets automobile standards, the automobile industry has to listen and move because they can't sell cars anywhere else. I mean, they're not going to be, if they can't sell them in California, it's just not a genuine marketplace. So that's the impact California has. This man ran for governor and had a profound impact on our politics in the 1970s. He was 1974 and 78 elected governor twice in California. He's been mayor of Oakland. A lot of people scratched their heads and said, what's that all about? He proved he could run a city and make things happen. Now he's been 2 more times the governor of the state of California. And he has made California, I assure you, a model for how to approach what governors and states can do to make a difference on this. So I hope you'll join me in welcoming the good governor of the state of California, Jerry Brown. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you. And I do want to say we are making progress. I can tell you that. I was in Rio in 1992 when the framework on climate change was adopted, and then nothing much happened. I went down to Johannesburg in 2002, and I saw the Iranian ambassador talking to the American ambassador, all talking about fossil fuel and rejecting many resolutions at that point to encourage renewable energy. So not much happened there. Now we get to Paris. That was a real commitment. And as far from the ultimate solution as it is, it's a long way from where we were just a few years before. So that's good. We are moving in a positive direction, and climate change is at least talked about. It was only a couple of years ago when the press barely would mention climate change. And I know that because I had several press conferences with scientists announcing relatively relevant and important achievements or ideas, and there is zero press because the idea of the end of the world is not news. It really isn't news. The latest little news of the day predominates. But now with the Paris Agreement, that's been changed. You can actually find a lot of stories on climate change, and we're here. That shows you that we're making some progress. But we still have a long way to go. We got a lot of barriers. So I want to talk a little bit about that because money is a problem because we're not spending it, but we just learned we have 40 trillion sitting around doing nothing. Negative, low interest, cash. So we can deploy that. That's just waiting. Now, why can't we deploy it? Because of politics. And what are the politics? We have a bunch of troglodytes in too many high places. Now, you know what a troglodyte is. It's a dweller in deep, dark caves. That is a metaphor for the level of enlightenment of those in charge of our political structure in Washington today. So that's the threat. It's a political threat. Now, we start with Trump, but we have his EPA director, the former Attorney General of Oklahoma. He's just doing everything he can to destroy and dismantle the modest steps that were made under President Obama. So he's going full speed in the absolute wrong direction. So then we have that fellow from Oklahoma, the senator. He's in charge of the Environmental Committee, Mr. Inhofe. And this is their level, his level. He got himself a snowball somehow in Washington. Look, there's a snowball. There's no global warming. It's all a hoax. And he got that idea hoax, and then that's where Trump picked up the idea that climate change is a hoax. He didn't invent that. That was invented by other characters in his general political constituency. But he added one little note to it. He called it not only a hoax, but it was a Chinese hoax. So you have the president actually asserting, and when the president asserts something, generally that's pretty serious, that all climate science, all the academies of science, Russia, England, France, Germany, America, Japan, Russia, all of them who've all concluded and put out papers about the seriousness of climate change and its human causation. All that's a hoax, and it's a Chinese hoax. So that's about as preposterous and as outrageous as you could get, but we have it. And that didn't come just because Trump thought it up one day. There are actual companies, corporations that are promoting this propaganda. And there are institutes. There's the Heartland Institute, I'll name them. There's the Cato Institute. There are other respectable foundations that are all spewing total fabrications about one of the most important issues of our day. And those are being picked up and then disseminated right out of the White House. So that's what we're up against. And we're up against a governing party, the other party that I'm not a member of, whose name you all know, but I don't want to sound partisan, so I'm not going to mention it. Other than almost to a person, they deny human-caused climate change. You find me, well, now maybe you're going to get Lindsey Graham and McCain, hallelujah. That's good. They haven't been saying much the last couple of years. They've been pretty quiet. In fact, a lot of Republicans talked about climate change several years ago, then they all shut up. Something happened. I guess they had a meeting at the Koch brothers retreat or something, and they were all said, shut up, don't talk about climate change, and almost it never happens. Well, maybe today we're going to break through that. And in California, we had 8 Republicans in our California legislature that voted for the most far-reaching cap-and-trade bill in the country. And we got it, because we needed 2/3 votes, and we needed Republicans, and we got them. So there is a change. There is a turn that's being made, and that's all to the good. But we still have these barriers where complete fabrications are being promoted at government expense through the Office of the Environmental Protection Agency and through the White House itself. So you, in this intellectual environment, have your work cut out for you. We have to first destroy the mythology that is based on nothing, because we have the science, we have a growing number of chief executives, a growing number of people all over the world. You've heard hear other people talk about it, and yet we are prisoners of this situation in Washington. So that's where we can work. You may not be able to get the World Bank to do something, but you can through elections, through writing, through encouragement. We can shift the political center of gravity, which right now is really tilted. Now, there are solutions, and we're finding them, some of them in California. Our cap and trade is significant because we have a limit on greenhouse gas emissions within the state, and we have the significant enterprises reporting, and we have third-party validators who check on the reports, so we know what the emissions are. And we know they're in the approximate total of 440 million tons per year of greenhouse gases, and we have a cap of 260 million by 2030. And each year, this cap from where we are today is going down. And that has now been embraced in California by the Farm Bureau, by the Chamber of Commerce, by the Business Roundtable, and by significant industries, plus most of the Democrats and key Republicans. So this is an operational legal framework that is now working in that state. And we could do that in other states. And as we get a little more enlightenment along the election front, we can expand to more states. So there is a solution. We also we have auctions under this cap and trade. Just last month we had an auction, collected over $1 billion of companies buying allowances because they couldn't meet the cap. And every year those allowances will get more expensive as it comes down. So we're and by the way, with that $1 billion, we spend money. We're paying people to buy an electric car. We're spending tens of millions of dollars on dairies to get biodigesters that reduce methane emissions. I mean, we are very specific with real money, with real law enforced by the authorities of California. So we know it can be done, but we got to pick it up, and we need other states. And yes, while we're waiting for the president to come back into reality, there's a lot we can do. And there's a lot that universities can do, and that nonprofits and think tanks. I mean, this is a battle for survival. And, you know, it's not like the world's going to fall off in next month, but the unique issue of climate change is that we're not quite sure of where we stand. And there's something called tipping points. And things can tip over, setting the world on an irreversible trajectory of not 2 degrees centigrade above the industrial period, 3, 4, and on and on. There's a 5% chance that sea level will rise 8 feet by the end of this century. I mean, think of New York and Miami and New Orleans, not to mention Shanghai and Bangladesh and all these other places. So it's a real mortal threat. It's a threat to the entire world, but it's not today. It's not tomorrow. Although actually, if we pass the tipping point that we don't understand, we might be there before we know it. So we have to mobilize to take out this threat. And the threat is real. And when the threat is your own president, that becomes complicated. You know, what else can you do but elect another president? I can't think of it any other way. And that's real simple. You just have to get more votes in the Electoral College than he did. So that's what you got to do. And it is politics, and it's science, and it's intellectual investigation, and it's this financing. It's all of it together. The knowledge is here, the solution is at hand. All you have to do is get it done. And I will join with you, and we will see it. Over the next couple of years, we will drive the hoax hucksters out of Washington and bring in some common sense truth about where we stand and where we got to go. Thank you.
It's good to have somebody who is clear. No minced words. So we've just had a storm, Harvey, that dumped more water, more rainfall than ever before. Historic, record broken. We've just had a storm, Irma, which is the first hurricane to ever have sustained winds over 185 miles an hour for an entire 24 hours. And we have record wildfires burning up in the state of California and the state of Washington and elsewhere. 3 immutable facts, they're happening. And yet, as Jerry just described, we have leaders, so-called, who ignore these facts. Anne Hidalgo raised the issue of fake news. And I want to just ask, since we have 2 currently elected officials on the dais with us, and then I'd like to get Jim involved in this too. So how is it that, apart from the money, apart from the special interest part of it that's driven by a Cato Institute or by the Koch brothers or so forth, which we all acknowledge, that's always been a part of our politics. But what is different today appears to be the inability of anybody to settle on facts. I mean, John Adams once said, facts are stubborn things. Pat Moynihan, my colleague in the Senate, said everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but are not entitled to your own facts. Yet this is an administration that has presented alternative facts. So how do we break through? What has happened that the dialogue of our democracy is actually incapable of settling on facts? And I will tell you, from a governing point of view, it is really hard to build consensus if you can't begin to decide what the truth is. So, Jerry, would you pick up on that for a minute, and then I want to come over to you, Jay, and see. how we push back against this, because it is stealing our democracy and it is stealing the future, because it prevents us from being able to make these rational, common sense decisions based on empirical evidence. What do you say?
Well, one of the barriers, of course, is the media habit of presenting fair and balanced news, to use the phrase. And they balance it. So if somebody says 2 + 2 is 4, and somebody else says 2 + 2 is 5, they have to give a little bit of equal time to the absurdity. Now, that's an extreme case, but in the case of climate change, that's kind of what it is. I think the key is winning over more business leaders. There are a number of business leaders already. There are even oil companies, energy companies. There are a lot of businesses and their CEOs that are joining in the effort to decarbonize the economy. Now, they are a very powerful pillar of the Republican Party. And the key here is you've got to change many Democrats, but you have to crack the Republican Party much further open than it is to the climate science. So I think that is where the focal point has to be, getting the business community through specific corporations to join in the effort. And they're already in various alliances, and part of what we're doing is not only states and cities, but it's participants. What is your goal, and how close are you to the electorate? If you look at the electorate itself, you'll find that there's well over 20 to 30% of Republicans who believe in climate change. So that would be my simple formula. Work with the business people, transform those aspects of our political parties that are the hindrance, and then move ahead with the financing and the other regulatory and legal actions that we all know we have to take.
And just to emphasize, the yesterday, Jeff Immelt, who is the outgoing CEO of General Electric, one of our largest companies, most successful companies, said very clearly that President Trump's decision to pull out of Paris is a bad for business decision, and that is going to handicap American businesses, and businesses, he said, have to have their own foreign policy. That's a very dramatic statement to come from a Fortune 500 company CEO, and I think it's indicative of what Jerry's saying, that companies see that this landscape, this marketplace is changing dramatically. Biggest market the world has ever seen. Trillions of dollars are going to be spent in it. And if American business is going to succeed, American business is going to have to be at the table. Jay, what about on the whole issue of the news and your ability now to lead the democratic process in a way that's rational?
Well, I would say that we should spend less time thinking about how to change the mind of a climate denier who decides to ignore settled science and settle on a focused, aggressive, intense, personally dedication to remove them from office. These people need to be removed from office where they cannot do harm. You are never going to convince a climate denier who brings a snowball to the floor of the Senate that we ought to do something about this. We simply have to focus on removing them from office. Now, most people think extinction is a bad thing, but it's a good thing to make climate deniers politically extinct. And that is what needs to happen in our body politic. Now, let me tell you why I bring this up. Jerry had tremendous success this year in California maintaining the cap-and-trade system. I talked to one of the Republican leaders of their legislature who voted for, and there are 8 or 9 who voted for the measure. And I asked him, why did you do that? And he said, I'll just give you a straight answer. I've concluded the Republican Party will be extinct if we don't get on board doing something about this obvious problem. And the reason they can and should be extinct, not the whole party, but at least climate deniers, is the people in this room. The people in this room understand your future is dependent on solving this problem. And I want to make a personal pitch to you to do something about this problem. Now, we got governors and World Bank and mayors up here and former secretaries of state. But what we need are Eli's knocking on doors and using your social networks to elect people in state legislatures that can affect state policies, and city council members that can elect city council policies, and senators and presidents. And we need that right away. And I got to tell you, I sat where you were 45 years ago. I was at the University of Washington, started to study clean energy, and I'm still at it. But there's something I want to say we need to come true. When I was a freshman, we used to have freshman movies. I don't know if they have freshman movies here, but we go to freshman movies every Sunday night. One of the first ones we saw was Casablanca. I'd never seen it before I was a freshman in college. My favorite line in that was when Humphrey Bogart said, "We'll always have Paris." I want to say we're going to always have Paris. And we're always going to have Paris. We're going to have Eli's knocking on doors to elect people in the next election cycle. And it is imperative to do that. I just want to ask you to personally make a commitment that the next time you hear Donald Trump say something that's absolutely asinine when it comes to climate change, that you'll go find a candidate to support to elect to these positions. We need you, you're powerful, and I'll tell you why we're always going to have Paris. When I've looked at this climate alliance that we have set up, we have learned that if you want to grow your economy, grow your climate change efforts. You know, when we passed our renewable portfolio standard several years ago, the fossil fuel industry said, if you do that, you'll destroy your economy. Then when I passed my executive order to put a cap on carbon dioxide, the fossil fuel industry said you will destroy your economy. Isn't it a great thing that CNBC just listed the best place to do business in the United States of America is the state of Washington because we're fighting climate change and we're building clean energy jobs like crazy. That's why we're going to win this. But there's a second reason, I'll just finish on this, why we're going to win this. Donald Trump cannot stop us. It doesn't matter what he does. He cannot stop us. This is an effort that is alive in Seattle. It's alive in Washington. It's alive in California. It's alive in Des Moines, Iowa. He cannot stop us. He will not stop us. We will win this battle.
So, I'm going to ask one more question of Jim Kim on this broader subject, then I want to come back to the specifics of what cities and states are doing a little bit. And Ann, I want to ask you after Jim about Paris's specific steps, because I think it's important for people to know what's happening. But Jim, wearing not just the hat of World Bank and all the countries and leaders you interact with on a daily basis, but as a former university president, just if you'd share your thoughts about this difficulty of building consensus and governing today and the whole issue of settling on facts in the context of our democracy today.
Well, let me start by saying that in the Articles of Agreement of the World Bank Group, World Bank employees are forbidden from getting involved in the internal politics of any of their member countries. So let me start with that, and then offer some thoughts on this. You know, one of the things we've learned is that no matter what happens in an election anywhere in the world, the science doesn't change. And for an organization like the World Bank Group, if we depart from the science, we lose our credibility very, very quickly. And so I made it clear to every single one of our governors that we will now and forever be an organization focused on science. And therefore, we have no choice but to go forward aggressively with our efforts on climate change. Now, you know, as a former university president, I have to say that over the last couple of years, on this issue of climate change, the universities have not been very present in the discussion. And I know personally many fantastic climate scientists, and for some reason, that voice hasn't come through as clearly as it could have. And so I would just say that, you know, if there is a way to think about how the messages, rather than sitting back with disdain for the discourse as it exists, but somehow thinking about the way to bring the research that's happening in places like Yale and bring it into the center of the discourse, you know, this is really important. Because I think some of the, you know, it's not just that, that there are certain political leaders all over the world not only are they arguing with the post-1945 world order, you know, the World Bank exists because in 1945 there was a sense that, my goodness, currency wars and the destruction of Europe, these things we have to figure out a way to stop. And so the UN was created, the Bretton Woods institutions, IMF and the World Bank were created, other organizations like NATO and OECD, all these organizations were created so that there would be a place that countries could go to talk about facts, to talk about science, and to talk about a way forward that benefited everybody. And so, in many ways, it's worked. It's worked. We haven't had more wars in Europe. There's been many things that have been positive about it. But not only do we see a rejection of the post-1945 world order, sometimes we see a rejection of the post-Enlightenment world order. And I think that this is something that the universities have to take very seriously. Now, we at the World Bank Group, by agreeing that we're not going to be political, we then have to say that our commitment is to evidence and always working on the basis of evidence. We have to work with all of our members. The United States is the largest shareholder at the World Bank Group. We continue to work with them on things other than climate change, like, for example, a very promising women's entrepreneurship initiative. We will continue to do that, but at the same time, because we're focused on the science, we won't veer from the path that we've taken. But we really need your help. We need the help of academic institutions to step up and get a little bit dirty. You know, my experience with academic institutions is that those arguments are so below us that we're not going to engage. I think the stakes, especially if you think about the people in the developing countries who are just getting battered, even today in the Caribbean, getting battered by climate change, that I don't think there's any room for the kind of disdainful approach that I unfortunately have experienced a lot in many of the universities.
So today, more than half of the world's population lives in cities. And by 2030, not so far away, 1 in every 3 people will live in a city that is about 500,000 people. Cities, now 90, are incredible incubators of initiatives. Building codes, you don't realize this, but buildings provide a huge percentage of greenhouse gas emissions. The choices that are made with respect to zoning requirements, recycling, transportation, public transportation, density, I mean, all of these issues are available to us as the tools to try to conglomerate what we need to do to meet this challenge, which is gigantic. And Hidalgo and Paris, appropriately, have taken some really important initiatives and are continuing to break new ground. So Anne, if you'd share with us what Paris has done, what is your vision for how Paris is going to continue to set an example here?
Thank you. Just first, I agree with what you say, of course, and we have to build consensus with the business world. And it's very important because our credibility is with business world if we can prove that, yes, we bring new opportunities for our citizens, for employment, and it's very important to build that. I have 2 examples in this topic. First, in our agenda in Paris, in October, we will organize a meeting between CEOs of companies in 3 areas, because these 3 areas are very connected with cities: transportation, mobility, real estate, construction, and energy. And mayors and CEOs together, like a Davos, but Davos with cities and not in Davos in Paris. And I think this meeting will be very efficient for us, because in this alliance, in this, we need to convince people, journalists, and the people who are thinking in the old world. And we are here, we build the new world with the climate change opportunity, because it is also an opportunity, and with the fourth revolution, industrial revolution, with the digital revolution. And we can do it. We can do it and convince, and I think we can win in this fight. Second, we have in Paris the birthday, the celebration of the Paris Agreement, the 12-12, this year, and the President Macron organized a summit about finance, because we need today to bring the finance, and this finance have to help and to help to build these new opportunities for this new world. And we have to forget the old world. Today in Paris, we work a lot about my first goal is to reduce air pollution, because it's the first topic. We have according to the World Health Organization, the air pollution kills 3 million people worldwide. And in my city, each year, 2,015 people did because air pollution. And we have to fight that. And for that, yes, we build policies for the reduce the traffic, the car traffic, and also to help to have new mobilities with car sharing, with electric car, with bicycle, and we have an invitation together to make a bicycle.
I get to make a bike tour of Paris with the mayor.
It's a project, and it's very, very important. But let me please, because we talk a lot about transportation, construction, and energy, but one idea. For me, ecology is not just scientific issues or business issues. It's also human issue. It's also social issue. I'm not the author of these words. It's the Pope Francois, when he say ecology is a humanism. And we need to have this idea very present when we build policies in our cities, because we have to build inclusive cities. If you have, if we have ecological policies, but just for one piece of citizens, it's not great. In our cities, in global cities, we have 3 populations. One, the winners of globalization, people like us. We have graduation, we have, for us, the world is our world. And in our cities, we have also losers of globalization. These people is in our global city because it needs protection. And we need to give this protection. And with the climate change, with this fight, we need to work with these people too, not just with the winner. And on the middle, we have the middle class who work for our cities, for economy, for, well, we need this middle class. And our policies will be very inclusive, because if we work just for one part of these people, we can't win. It's impossible. We need to be very inclusive in our policies. And that's why in Paris, our policies in adaptation about climate change, in fact, about air pollution, we put in these policies a lot of social policies, because we need to be very inclusive and to have not just consensus with leaders, business leaders, and politicians and journalists, but also with all the citizens, and winners and losers too. We have to bring policies for all these people if we will win in this fight against climate change.
Ms. Secretary, could the mayor provoked a thought. We are so appreciative. We've had a president to try to shut the door to refugees. Many refugees are climate refugees. We've heard about that. Paris, France, the whole of Europe has stepped up to the plate to help these refugees. Can we give a round of applause for Europe and Paris for what they've done?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jay, thank you. You're absolutely right, and it's been at very significant political cost, I might add. Jerry, at the federal level, when there was an attempt to try to move cap and trade, we ran into this ideological wall. Ironically, cap and trade came out of the American Enterprise Institute. It was a conservative idea originally because it was market-based. But then the ideologues grabbed onto it and transformed it into a bête noire that is unacceptable because it's, quote, command and control interference of government in the marketplace now. Complete flip to talk about the sophistry of our recent politics. So how did you in California, I know you have a legislature that's of the same party, so you've got uniform ability to move forward, but you obviously ran into these arguments, and I wonder if you'd share with people how you knocked those down or overcame them in order to institute a cap and trade system in California itself.
Well, to institute it, actually, that was done by my predecessor, Arnold, the Terminator. Yes, Arnold. That's what we call him. But Schwarzenegger had some big ideas. High-speed rail, nonpartisan primaries. So one of these was greenhouse gas reduction. And he joined with essentially all the Democrats. I think he got maybe one Republican vote, and he put the first cap and trade program into effect. And then it was to expire in 2020, and the second round, I was able to lead the effort to get it extended to 2030. And we did that in part with the help of the Republican minority leadership, who came in to see me many months ago and said, we want to do something on climate change. Also, there was a certain amount of resistance from the Democrats because there is resistance, and they were rather reluctant. So there was another factor. The year before, I proposed a 50% reduction in oil use in California, a very bold move. And along with that, the cap on overall greenhouse gases. Well, the oil companies mobilized to stop the 50% reduction in oil, and they kind of lost sight of the power of the cap. Once we put the cap into place last year, then the companies had to say, do we want to be regulated by bureaucrats in the state capital, or do we want a market-based system of auctions and allowances that allows companies to either do what they can do best or to pay some money to other companies who found a more efficient way to reduce overall greenhouse gases. So because we had the cap, we were able to then get all the industries to support the cap and trade, because they knew it was about 3 times cheaper and more efficient than a regulatory approach of each individual industry. The cement industry, refineries, dairies, all the things that are now would have to be regulated are put under the cap and trade system, much more efficient, impersonal. It actually is quite elegant in the way it works. One more point in the history of this particular system, which, as I say, and I want to emphasize, there's nothing like it anywhere else in America. Quebec has one, and they're part of our system, and Ontario is going to join. And there are going to be other states that will join, but not as yet. Now, what was the first challenge? As soon as Arnold Schwarzenegger put this into effect, with Democratic votes primarily, the oil companies, Tesoro for one, Valero for another, put a measure on the ballot to repeal it. And the people mobilized, investor named Tom Steyer, and Mr. Schultz, former Secretary of State under Ronald Reagan, they joined the cause, and a number of other people. And this particular popular referendum, or as we call it, initiative, was defeated by 23 points. So that was an incredible, there was a battle, and we won the battle. And so it's step by step, but it took a Schwarzenegger to push it with the Democrats. Then it took me to extend it. It took people to beat back the oil companies. And by this time around, the oil companies were actually in silent support. So it takes battles. The first ones are harder. It gets easier as you go down the road. And I just want to end up by saying how important business is. We could not have gotten this if the Chamber of Commerce and the Roundtable and the Farm Bureau and the Western Dairymen hadn't said, we support it. They did say that. So you got to get business. That's it. And the Democrats and the academics can only go so far. But I think the point I would make, there was a famous president of General Motors named Charlie Wilson. He said, what's good for General Motors is good for America. Now, we kind of ridiculed that in the 60s, but nevertheless, if General Motors thinks climate action is good for them, then it will be good for America, because America will pick it up, because the money plays a powerful interest in our elections, billions of dollars. I know, I've raised $100 million myself. It's not trivial who those people are. And the Republicans, it's also plenty important. So that is kind of the formula. It's pretty simple. We know the threat. We know we need business allies. We know the universities and the nonprofit sector can have a role in influencing all that. And we put it all together, you can get it done. It is possible. But the hour is late, and we don't know how far down the road to an irreversible climate catastrophe we're headed. So, well, that's all I'm saying. Be a little optimistic, but be more activist to get it done. And you can play a role, because you folks at Yale, you all end up on all these big corporations. That's where you're going, whether you know it or not. And you're going to be in corporate America, and don't forget what you heard today. And please implement it as soon as possible. Thank you.
Jay, could you speak to the same thing quickly, just sort of share your challenge now with you've promulgated cap and trade. There are some people rising in opposition to it. Can you give us a sense of that road ahead? And
well, we've had a different route. So I have put in, we have a cap, a limit on the amount of carbon dioxide that can be emitted in the state of Washington. And that was imposed by my executive order with my stroke of the pen, pursuant to our state clean air law. So we have a binding cap that limits the amount through a regulatory system that regulates these industries. They have to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide at a regular rate every year required by our rule. Now, it won't surprise you that the oil and gas industry is challenging that. It's in litigation, but we believe we are on firm ground to win that. A cap-and-trade system is elegant because, as Jerry said, one thing I learned, Frank, when I got my degree in economics, was that the market is efficient in determining the cheapest way to get these savings. And it is an elegance to us, and that's why I fought for it and helped Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi. We passed a cap-and-trade system through the U.S. House of Representatives, and we ran into the Republican stone wall in the Senate. So there are multiple ways to get to a cap, but the cap is the fundamental first thing you need. Now I want to dovetail back about something I talked about a little earlier. Businesses are extremely important in the success of these programs. Unfortunately, in my state, I have many businesses that support limitations on carbon. High-tech companies that understand that if they're going to have a virtual world to sell software, they need a real world where people can breathe and don't die of asthma and cancer and hurricanes and fires. So we have a lot of support for these efforts in my state because they understand it's economically productive. And by the way, it's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that the most rapidly growing economies in the states are the same states that are taking action against carbon pollution. Washington, California, New York. These are the most rapidly growing economies, and guess what they have in common? They have actions against carbon pollution, because when you don't waste energy, you improve your performance. When you don't treat the atmosphere as a sewer, but rather as a common asset that we all breathe and all own, you have better economic performance. This is not a surprise. But Jerry mentioned about how some of even silently, there was support from even the fossil fuel industry in his cap and trade. There is a reason for that, and the reason is the voters of California elected members of his legislature that were going to support him in a regulatory approach if they didn't do this cap and trade. And that's where you come in. That's where you come in, because it doesn't matter how much money the fossil fuel industry can put in this lobbying effort. If you are successful in electing state legislators across the country who will demand and stand up for action. And I'm saying you got as much power as Donald Trump on this right now. And I'm serious about that. Everybody in this room has as much power. I'll give you an example. This fall, we have a special election in one state legislative race. The winner of that will determine control of the Washington state legislature. If one candidate wins, we will be able to move forward on climate change legislation. If the other candidate wins, we will not. We will be a dead stop. The people of that district and the people everywhere are going to make that decision. I want to vest you in power as you walk out of this room. You're as powerful as anybody else. I hope you're going to join this cause. Thank you.
So we're going to wrap up. We're going to wrap up in a couple of minutes to honor everybody's schedules here, including our guests. I just want to ask Jim Kim. The World Bank is this powerful institution. It has enormous leverage and ability to make things happen. Jim, we talked about this amount of money that's sitting on the sidelines. Could you just share your vision for where you see the bank being able now to leverage de-risking politically, de-risking financially, and begin to move the capital that we need, which ultimately may be one of the key plays in this entire effort?
Well, first let me thank Governor Inslee, Governor Brown, and Mayor Hidalgo, because what they're demonstrating is something really, really critical that we're seeing in other parts of the world, that you can decouple economic growth from carbon output. Germany has done that as a country, and there are many, many other examples. 33 U.S. states have been able to decouple economic growth from carbon emissions. And so let me start by saying, let me give you some of the details of what we're doing. But I didn't mean to be too negative on the disdainful part. Here's what I think we really need from students and from communities like Yale. There is, as we've heard, an extremely inspiring vision of what the world would look like if everyone was competing to find the cleanest possible approach to providing energy, to building roads, to building cities. And that's the kind of competition we need to start. The cap and trade is so important for us. What Governor Brown did, what Governor Inslee has done, this is so important, but we need a global system. Now, I think what we're going to hear from Secretary Baker is that they're pushing this idea that we need to think about a price on carbon. Now, if there was a price on carbon, I think you'd see market mechanisms kick in, and people who are not focused right now on trying to build low-carbon solutions for the world would go in that direction. I think that's really critical, and this is the great example we've seen here today. But here's what we're doing. So it turns out that many investors look at the entire developing world as just sort of one big blob. And so they will say things to us like, well, we're really worried about investments in Africa, as if Africa was a single country. And so we're now, first of all, trying to educate people about the hugely different risks from country to country and region to region in Africa and South Asia. That's one part. But I think the other thing that we need to do is that, we have lots of capital. We borrow at the lowest rate of just about anybody in the world. For you finance people, on any given day, I borrow at about LIBOR minus 10 basis points, very, very low level, almost as low as US Treasury. And so we can use our ability to borrow at low cost. We can use the fact that we work with donors from all over the world and provide very low-cost capital to get things going. So let me just give you an example. For the drop in the price of solar, the only thing that we have seen that rivals the rapidity of the drop in the price of solar is the explosion of cell phones and smartphones in the world. Solar energy is on that path, and the demand is just huge. And it's huge even in Africa because we can do solar much more quickly than coal or hydro or even oil and gas, and we can move it to communities very, very quickly. Now, the problem is, again, that investors or solar providers who might go think it's too risky. So we de-risk by actually putting our own money on the table and investing with them. We de-risk by taking first loss on debt instruments. We de-risk by providing political risk insurance, credit enhancement, a promise to pay the fees if the country can't pay it at certain times. But more importantly, we want to de-risk these investments in a positive way. We want the investors to think, wow, you mean I can earn a higher return, in fact, a much higher return than a negative interest rate, and then also have this amazing impact on making the world cleaner, decarbonizing energy in these countries? And the answer is yes, but we haven't brought them all to the table yet. We're going to start this process literally tomorrow at the Bloomberg Forum. We're going to bring lots of different folks together. And every time I've done it, every time I've brought the people together, just like Mayor Hidalgo talked about, every time I've brought them together, people have been surprised at what the others are capable of doing. So my request to you is help us, and this is the sciences, the humanities, architecture, law, medicine, help us envision this inspiring sense of what the world could look like. And also, I think you need to point out that if the U.S. is not involved in aggressively going after these low-carbon technologies, the U.S. will be left in the dust because other countries are moving very aggressively in that direction. China, Japan, all over East Asia, in the European countries. It's an inspiring view, but it's also a dangerous one that if you keep veering away from these clean technologies, we'll be left in the dust and economic growth will suffer.
Very, very important point and eloquently made. And as we wrap up here, let me just share a couple of thoughts with all of you if I can. First of all, I hope many of you will be able to return, or all of you can return to hear Jim Baker and Leonardo DiCaprio this afternoon. And I'm going to say something to you now because I don't know, obviously, who is able to be back, and I will share some of this when we do the activism discussion this afternoon. But what you've heard here is a brilliant example of why we're a pretty powerful country and why we have a beautiful idea in our democracy. And we're not alone in that. There are other countries that share that value. But for people sitting here who are steadfast in believing something and fighting for it, even if it means standing up to powerful forces in the country. And they're making a difference. Nothing is more important than that right now. The electricity, the potential of solar power is a growth industry in America that is growing 17 times faster per year than our general economy. The single fastest growing job in America today, which is well paying, is a wind turbine technician. This notion that you have to choose between the economy and doing something about climate change is a creation of these entities that don't want to change anything. And it's almost always a creation of entities that are ideologically standing in the way of modernity and progress. When I was in Antarctica last year, there was a New Zealand scientist named Gavin Dunbar who said to me, you know, what you're seeing here in Antarctica is the canary in the coal mine. And he said, some of the things we're seeing here may be irreversible. It's the point Jerry made, Jim, I think everybody here is making. We don't know what we don't know. But as public people, we have a fundamental responsibility to implement the precautionary principle. We buy insurance to protect our homes. We buy insurance not to have our car uninsured if we have a crash, so on and so on. We're not buying enough insurance against what scientists are telling us is going to happen. And it is happening. Every day we're seeing return on a prediction of 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. And it's frighteningly coming back faster and bigger than was predicted. And here's something that just infuriates me, and I'm sure everybody up here, I know Jerry shares this. There is a report was due on August 18th, mandated by Congress, special report on climate science, and that report has been sat on, prevented from being promulgated by Scott Pruitt at the EPA against the rules and regulations, just intervened because that report has in it sentences that talk about how there is increased wind velocity, cyclonic effect as a result of warmer waters, how there will be increased floods, etc. They don't want it. They don't want the truth. They don't want the evidence. And I just want to emphasize what both Jay and Jerry have said to you, I say this after 28 years in the United States Senate and 4 years as secretary, and I've run for president and once and run for Senate 5 times. I believe in the power that you have also, and you have to believe in it. In 1970, when I came back from Vietnam, the first thing I did was not protest the war. The first thing I did was work for Earth Day, 1970. When 20 million Americans came out of their homes and said, we don't want to live next to toxic waste sites, we don't want to live next to dumps that give you cancer, we do not want to watch rivers like the Cuyahoga River light on fire. We want to do something about it. And guess what? That 20 million people translated subsequently into political action, what Jay was talking about, Jerry, so that we targeted the 12 worst votes in the United States Congress. We labeled them the dirty dozen. And in the next election, 7 of the 12 members of Congress lost their seats. Let me tell you something. There is nothing like a bunch of your friends losing their seats to stiffen the spine of elected officials. What happened was, all of a sudden, we passed Clean Air Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, Marine Mammal Protection Act, Coastal Zone Management Act. We created the EPA, and Richard Nixon, that brilliant environmentalist, signed that into law because it was a voting issue. Now, let me tell you, I've had the privilege of monitoring elections in a number of countries over my career, beginning with the Philippines in 1986 with Cory Aquino and Ferdinand Marcos. And I have watched people in other countries stand in the hot sun, at risk sometimes of terrorism, go out and vote in 70, 80, 90% numbers. We were in the 50s last year in this election between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. 50%. That's just gross. It's unacceptable. When I was here at Yale as an undergraduate, we almost had a nuclear war, the missile crisis with the Soviet Union. A president of the United States was assassinated my sophomore year. My junior year, we lined up buses on High Street and sent people down south at risk of life to help break the back of segregation. And senior year, we confronted the draft and the issue of Vietnam. And each of those years, I saw us empowered to make a difference. No campaign in America works without young people. We call them the Peanut Butter and Jelly Brigade, being willing to come into a campaign and slave at horrible hours to help make a difference. So yes, you got to study. Yes, it's competitive as hell. Yes, you've got a career track. But nobody has to be in such a hurry that they can't take time to be a good citizen and to be involved in holding the Pruitts of this world and everybody else accountable to the law and to a vision which makes a difference for our country. And I hope every single one of you, and I know every one of our colleagues here hopes every single one of you will do that. Please join me in thanking these terrific leaders for the example they are setting and for being with us today. Thank you. Thank you.